Welcome to the Sleepkeeper's library. I am the historian, one of 3 keepers who tend to this ancient repository of stories, knowledge, and dreams. You see, this library exists in the space between waking and sleeping, where forgotten worlds live on in whispered tales. My colleagues and I have dedicated our existence to preserving these stories for weary souls who seek comfort in the quiet hours. There are 3 of us who serve here. The Myth Keeper guards the stories that shaped human consciousness, her collection holding myths that crossed oceans and survived centuries, legends whispered around fires since the first humans wondered what watched from the forest shadows. The wanderer walks through histories that never were, tracing paths time did not take, his collection holding the great what-ifs of possibility. And I am keeper of the forgotten crafts, the lost ways, the vanished voices of those whose hands built our world with patience and skill. My collection holds the stories of master craftsmen, ancient trades, and the quiet dignity of work done with love rather than haste. Tonight, I've discovered something truly remarkable in my archives. Records of the last traditional bookbinders of Florence, working in the shadow of Gutenberg's revolution. So, settle in, dear listener. Let the fire warm you as we journey together into a world where every book was a small miracle of human dedication. As you settle in for tonight's journey, perhaps adjust your pillows, dim those lights, just a touch more. Tonight, we're travelling back to the year 1480, to the workshop of Master Benedetto, where the ancient art of hand bookbinding was making its final beautiful stand against the march of mechanical progress. Picture Florence in the early morning. The Arno River catches the first golden light, and somewhere in a narrow street near Santa Croce, Master Benedetto is already at work, just as his father was, and his father's father before him. In Benedetto's workshop, the day begins before dawn, not because of urgency, but because of ritual. The craft of bookbinding, you see, was never hurried. It was a conversation between the binder and time itself. Benedetto enters his workshop as his apprentice, young Marco, is already preparing the vellum. The smell hits you immediately. Not unpleasant, but rich and complex. There's the earthy scent of animal hides soaking in oak bark, the sharp tang of iron gall ink, and underneath it all, the comforting aroma of beeswax and linseed oil. The vellum they use comes from calfskin, prepared in a process that hasn't changed in centuries. Each sheet represents hours of careful work, the hide scraped clean with a lunarium, a curved blade that requires years to master, then stretched on frames until it becomes thin enough to hold the most delicate script, yet strong enough to last lifetimes. Marco's hands move across the vellum with practiced precision. At 15, he's been in this workshop for 3 years, and his fingers have developed the sensitivity to feel imperfections that would be invisible to untrained eyes. A small nick in the surface, a variation in thickness, these details matter when you're creating something meant to outlast empires. Benedetto examines the tools laid out on his workbench. Each one was crafted specifically for his hands, worn smooth by decades of use. The bone folder, carved from a sheep's leg bone, fits perfectly in his palm. The curved needles, forged by the local blacksmith to his exact specifications. These aren't just tools, they're extensions of his body, as familiar as his own fingers. But this morning, there's something different in the air. Word has reached Florence about a German invention, a machine that can produce books faster than a dozen scribes working together. The printing press, they call it. Some say it's the future. Others whisper it's the death of everything beautiful about the written word. Benedetto has seen one of these printed books. A merchant brought it from Venice just last month. The letters were uniform, identical, precise in a way that human hands could never achieve. But they lacked something indefinable, the subtle variations that made each handwritten letter unique, the slight tremor that revealed the scribe's humanity. Today, Benedetto and Marco are working on a psalter commissioned by a wealthy merchant. The text has been copied by Brother Antonio at the nearby monastery, and now it's time for the most crucial step, gathering the signatures. A signature, in the bookbinder's language, isn't what you might think. It's a large sheet of vellum, folded multiple times to create several pages. The way these folds are made determines how the book will lay open, how the text will align, whether the finished volume will be a joy to read or a frustration to handle. Marco watches as Benedetto demonstrates the proper technique. Feel the grain of the vellum, the master says, his voice barely above a whisper. Like wood, it has a direction it wants to bend. Work with it, never against it. The apprentice nods, understanding that this is about more than technique. It's about patience, about reading the materials, about accepting that some things cannot be rushed. In a world increasingly fascinated by speed and efficiency, this workshop exists in a different time. Each signature must be perfect. A single miscalculation in the folding will mean pages that don't align properly, text that runs into the binding, or worse, a book that falls apart within years instead of lasting centuries. Benedetto has seen too many rushed jobs, books bound quickly for impatient customers, only to return in tatters within a few seasons. As the morning progresses, they accumulate neat stacks of signatures. Each one represents about 16 pages of the final book. The psalter they're creating will have 32 signatures when complete. Over 500 pages of carefully prepared vellum, each sheet a small work of art in itself. But the folding is only the beginning. Now comes the sewing, the process that will hold these signatures together for centuries to come. Benedetto selects his thread carefully. It's made from hemp, twisted by hand until it's strong enough to support the weight of the book, yet fine enough to lie flat between the pages. The thread must be waxed before use, rolled across a block of beeswax until it's waterproof and slightly stiff. This prevents it from stretching over time, which would cause the binding to loosen. It's one of hundreds of small details that separate a master craftsman from an amateur. But before the sewing can truly begin, there is another art to master, the preparation of the covers that will protect these precious pages for centuries to come. Benedetto moves to a different corner of the workshop, where sheets of leather hang like tapestries along the wall. Selecting leather for a book is not unlike a vintner selecting grapes. Everything matters: the animal it came from, how it was tanned, how long it has aged, even the season in which it was prepared. Benedetto runs his hands across several hides, feeling for something that only experience can teach you to recognize. "This one," he says, pulling down a sheet of calfskin that has been hanging for nearly 2 years. The leather is supple but strong, tanned with oak bark in a process that takes months of patient attention. Marco watches as his master holds the leather up to the light from the window, examining it for imperfections, scars from the animal's life, thin spots, variations in thickness. The smell of the leather is rich and complex, earthy, slightly sweet, with undertones of the tannins used to preserve it. It's a scent that speaks of transformation, of something once living being transformed into something that will outlast stone. Benedetto breathes it in deeply, a ritual he's performed 10,000 times, yet it never loses its significance. He lays the leather across his largest workbench, smoothing it flat with broad, confident strokes. Leather has memory, he tells Marco, though this is a lesson the boy has heard before. It remembers how you treat it, handle it roughly, and it will always want to return to that roughness. Treat it with respect, with patience, and it becomes your partner in creation. The cutting is done with a curved knife, sharp enough to slice through the leather in one smooth motion. There can be no sawing, no hesitation. A clean cut, or nothing at all. Benedetto measures carefully, marking the leather with a piece of chalk that will brush away later. The cover must be precise. Too small, and it won't protect the pages adequately. Too large, and it will be clumsy, unwieldy. Each cut releases more of that distinctive leather scent into the workshop. Marco has learned to love this smell, to associate it with the transformation of raw materials into finished beauty. He watches as his master's knife moves with the confidence of 40 years' practice, never wavering, never second-guessing. But cutting is only the beginning. Now comes the tooling, the decoration that will make this book unique, recognizable, worthy of the Psalter within. Benedetto selects his tools from a wooden case that belonged to his father, and his father's father before him. Each tool is a small brass stamp, heated in the coals of the fire until it glows just hot enough to mark the leather without burning it. The merchant who commissioned this book requested a simple design, a cross within a circular border with small flourishes at the corners. Simple, perhaps, but achieving simplicity with elegance requires more skill than creating something ornate and busy. Benedetto heats his first tool, testing its temperature against a scrap piece of leather until the mark it leaves is exactly right. The first impression is always the most important. The leather is slightly dampened, not wet, but carrying just enough moisture to accept the mark without resistance. Benedetto positions his tool with absolute precision, then presses down firmly, holding it for a count of 3 before lifting it away. The mark left behind is perfect, a clean line, exactly the right depth, that catches the light when the leather is tilted. Marco counts silently as his master works, watching the pattern emerge one careful impression at a time. The circular border requires 32 individual stamps, each one placed precisely so that the line appears continuous, unbroken. A single mistake and the entire piece of leather would be ruined, wasted, and they would have to begin again. But there are no mistakes. Benedetto's hands know this work the way a musician's hands know their instrument. Each movement is automatic, yet fully conscious. His breathing synchronizes with the rhythm of the work. Heat the tool, position it, press, lift, examine. Heat the tool, position it, press, lift, examine. The workshop fills with a new scent now, the smell of hot brass against dampened leather. Slightly acrid but not unpleasant. It's the smell of permanence being branded into material, of decoration becoming inseparable from substrate. These marks will last as long as the leather itself, possibly centuries, definitely lifetimes. As the pattern nears completion, Benedetto allows himself a moment of satisfaction. The cross is centered perfectly, the circular border is seamless, and the corner flourishes balance each other with mathematical precision. This is the work that separates a craftsman from an artist. The ability to make something functional, also beautiful. You see, Benedetto says to Marco, the decoration is not merely ornament. It tells the reader, before they even open the book, that what lies within is valuable, that someone cared enough to make it beautiful. A book without a worthy cover is like a cathedral without a facade. The glory is hidden, unannounced. The final step in preparing the leather is applying a mixture of oils and waxes that will protect it from moisture, from handling, from the passage of time itself. Benedetto mixes his own formula: beeswax, linseed oil, and a secret ingredient that he will reveal to Marco only when the boy becomes a master himself. This is the way of craft guilds, the way knowledge is preserved and protected. He applies the mixture with a soft cloth, working it into the leather in circular motions that gradually bring out a deep, rich luster. The leather seems to come alive under his hands, transforming from matte to luminous. It will take several applications, each one allowed to dry completely before the next, but the result will be a cover that looks better with age, that develops character through use rather than deteriorating. Marco watches this transformation with wonder that hasn't dimmed despite having seen it dozens of times before. There is something almost magical about it. The way the leather deepens in colour, how the tooled pattern becomes more pronounced, the way the material seems to whisper that it is ready, that it knows its purpose. With the covers prepared, they return to the signatures that have been waiting patiently on the workbench. Now the true binding can begin. The sewing begins with a rhythm as old as the craft itself. Benedetto's needle moves in and out of the signatures in a pattern passed down through generations. It's not random. Each stitch must be placed precisely to distribute the stress evenly across the binding. Listen to the vellum, Benedetto tells Marco. It will tell you when the needle is in the right place. This seems mystical to the young apprentice, but gradually he begins to understand. The sound changes slightly when the needle finds the perfect spot, a soft whisper instead of a resistant scrape. The master's hands move with unconscious grace, each motion economical and precise. 40 years of this work have taught him to waste no energy, to let the tools do the work while he guides them. It's a meditation in motion, a dance between craftsman and material. As they work, Benedetto shares stories of the books he's bound over the decades. The illuminated gospel that took 3 years to complete, with gold leaf applied so thickly it seemed to glow in candlelight. The merchant's ledger that survived a fire because of the quality of its binding. The poetry collection that a young woman commissioned for her wedding, filled with verses about eternal love. Each book, he explains, has its own personality. Some want to be bound tightly, held secure against the world. Others prefer a looser binding, allowing them to open easily and welcome readers. A skilled binder learns to read these preferences, to give each book what it needs. Marco listens while concentrating on his own stitching. His hands aren't yet as sure as his master's, but they're learning. Each book he helps create teaches him something new about the balance between structure and flexibility, between protection and accessibility. As the afternoon reaches its warmest point, Benedetto sets down his needle and stretches his hands, working his fingers to ease the stiffness that comes from hours of precise work. "Come," he says to Marco, "we'll take a brief rest. Even thread needs time to settle into its place." They move to a small table near the workshop's narrow window, where Marco has laid out simple food: bread from the baker down the street, cheese from a farmer who trades it for bookbinding work, and wine watered in the Roman fashion. They eat in comfortable silence for a few moments, the distant sounds of Florence washing over them like gentle waves. I ever tell you about the first book I bound entirely on my own? Benedetto asks, though his tone suggests he knows he has, and that he's going to tell the story anyway. These repetitions are part of the teaching, Marco has learned. Each telling reveals some new detail, some new lesson that wasn't visible the last time. I was about your age, perhaps a year older. My father had been watching me work for months, correcting my mistakes, showing me again and again how to do things properly. Then one day, a young scholar came to the workshop. He wanted a simple binding for his personal copy of Cicero. Nothing fancy, but it had to be sturdy. He was planning to travel with it. Benedetto takes a slow sip of wine, his eyes distant with memory. My father looked at the scholar, then at me, and said, "My apprentice will bind your book." Just like that. No warning, no preparation. I thought my heart would burst from my chest. I was terrified of making a mistake, of bringing shame to my father's workshop. So I worked slower than I had ever worked before. Every stitch took me twice as long as it should have. Every measurement I checked 3 times. My father would walk by occasionally, glance at my work, and say nothing, which was somehow worse than if he had criticized me. Marco smiles, recognizing something of his own experience in the story. The silence of masters can be more terrible than their words. It took me a week to complete a binding that should have taken 3 days. When I was finished, I was certain I had failed somehow, that my father would find the flaw I couldn't see. But he picked up the book, examined it from every angle, opened it, closed it, bent the cover gently to test the hinges. And then he handed it back to me and said, "Now, do it again. But this time, trust your hands." He made me unbind the entire thing and start over. Marco's eyes widen. The whole book? But if it was done correctly... "That's what I said," Benedetto laughed softly. I was devastated. But my father explained something I didn't understand then, but understand now. He said, "You bound that book with fear. Fear makes books tight and brittle. A book bound with confidence, with trust in the craft. That book breathes. It lives." So I bound it again. And this time, instead of checking every measurement 3 times, I checked it once and trusted that I had learned well. Instead of making each stitch take twice as long, I found the rhythm of the work and let it carry me. When I was finished, in 3 days this time, the book looked identical to the first binding. But it felt different in the hands. It opened more easily. It wanted to be read. Benedetto looks at Marco directly now, his weathered face serious. That scholar took his Cicero on journeys from here to Constantinople and back. 20 years later, he returned to our workshop to have a different book bound, and he brought the Cicero with him to show my father. It had travelled thousands of miles, been read hundreds of times, and it looked as sound as the day I finished it, because it was bound with trust, not fear. The young apprentice nods slowly, understanding beginning to dawn in his eyes. How many times has he worked with fear? How many stitches has he placed while worried about making a mistake? The printing press, Benedetto continues, his voice thoughtful, can produce books with great speed, but it cannot produce them with trust, with confidence, with love. It cannot create something that breathes and lives. That is why our craft will endure, even if it changes, because there will always be those who understand the difference between a book that is made and a book that is born. They finish their simple meal in silence, but it is a comfortable silence, full of shared understanding. Then, without needing to speak, they both stand and return to their work. The signatures are waiting. The thread is ready, and Benedetto's hands, rested and renewed, move once again with the confidence of 4 decades' devotion to a craft that will outlive them both. The afternoon light begins to fade, filtered through the workshop's single window. This is when the work becomes most challenging. The light is dimmer, eyes grow tired, and the temptation to rush increases. But Benedetto maintains his steady pace, reminding Marco that consistency is more important than speed. Outside, they can hear the sounds of the city, merchants calling their wares, cartwheels on cobblestones, the laughter of children playing in the streets. But inside the workshop, time moves differently. Here, minutes and hours are measured not by clocks, but by the completion of tasks, by the accumulation of stitches, by the gradual transformation of raw materials into something lasting and beautiful. As the day's work continues, the light outside begins to soften and fade. The workshop takes on a different character in the approaching evening. Shadows lengthen across the workbench, and the fire's glow becomes more prominent. Benedetto and Marco work quietly now, their movements synchronized after years of shared labor. The rhythm of their work becomes almost hypnotic. The gentle pierce of needle through vellum, the soft whisper of thread being drawn through, the quiet satisfaction of each completed stitch. There's something deeply calming about watching this ancient craft unfold. No hurry, no urgency, just the steady accumulation of careful work, each movement deliberate, each choice considered. The fire crackles softly in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the stone walls. The day's work continues at its own gentle pace, unhurried by the concerns of the world outside. The workshop grows quiet as evening settles over Florence. The fire continues to whisper its ancient song, and somewhere in the gentle darkness, the work of preservation continues. As darkness settles over Benedetto's workshop, the rhythm of their work takes on an almost hypnotic quality. The master's hands continue their ancient dance, needle moving in and out with practiced precision. In the gentle darkness, you can almost hear the whisper of thread through vellum, the soft creak of leather being shaped and moulded. This is the sound of permanence being created, of something lasting emerging from temporary materials. Benedetto pauses in his work to add wood to the fire. The flames dance higher for a moment, casting new shadows before settling back into their steady glow. These are the same flames that have warmed craftsmen for centuries, the same light that has guided careful hands through delicate work. The night deepens, and still the work continues. There's no hurry here, no deadline that cannot wait for perfection. Each stitch is placed with the same care as the first, each measurement checked with the same diligence. Young Marco has found his rhythm now. His breathing has slowed to match the pace of the work, in and out, as the needle finds its mark, in and out, as the thread follows its ancient path. Outside, Florence sleeps. But in workshops like this one, the old ways persist. Hands that learned from other hands, techniques passed down like precious heirlooms, knowledge that exists nowhere but in the memory of muscles and the wisdom of practice. The fire burns lower now, but it never dies. Like the craft itself, it endures, tended carefully by those who understand its value. The light flickers gently across tools worn smooth by generations of use. Benedetto's voice comes softly in the darkness, sharing ancient wisdom with his apprentice. The book remembers how it was made, he whispers. Treat it with patience, and it will serve faithfully for centuries. Rush its making, and it will fall apart in decades. The night air carries the scent of the Arno, mixing with the workshop smells of leather and wax. This is Florence as it has always been, a place where beauty is created slowly, carefully, with love. As the hours pass, the distinction between craftsman and craft begins to blur. Benedetto's hands move as if guided by the vellum itself, following paths worn deep by tradition and instinct. The fire crackles softly, its light reflected in the eyes of master and apprentice alike. This is meditation in motion, prayer made manifest in careful stitches and perfect bindings. In the peaceful darkness, you can feel the weight of history, all the books that came before, all the hands that shaped them, all the knowledge they preserved through war and peace, fire and flood. The workshop settles into the deepest part of the night. The fire burns steady and low, casting gentle shadows that dance across centuries of accumulated wisdom. And still the work continues, as it always has, as it always will. In the quiet spaces between sleeping and waking, the old crafts endure, tended by patient hands and loving hearts. As I close this volume and return it to my shelves, I find myself wondering, as I often do, about the nature of loss. The bookbinder's craft didn't vanish because it lacked beauty or worth. It faded because the world chose speed over patience, efficiency over artistry. Gutenberg's press brought knowledge to the masses, a noble achievement, certainly. But something irreplaceable was traded away in that bargain. The intimate connection between craftsman and creation, the meditation of repetitive, careful work, the knowledge that lived only in skilled hands and could never be fully captured in instruction manuals. I sometimes wonder if my colleague, the myth keeper, has stories in her collection about the gods and heroes of craftsmanship. Hephaestus at his forge, the Norse dwarves who crafted Mjolnir, the legends humans told about those whose skills seemed almost magical. And I wonder too, if the wanderer has discovered a timeline where the printing press and the handbinder learned to coexist, where books could be produced quickly for those who needed information, yet precious volumes were still bound by hand for those who valued the art itself. Perhaps in one of those alternate paths, Benedetto's workshop still stands in Florence, training new apprentices in the ancient ways. But for now, here in my collection, I preserve what was. The memory of hands moving with purpose, the sound of thread through vellum, the quiet dignity of work done with love. Thank you for spending this time with me in the archives of forgotten crafts. If this journey has brought you comfort or sparked your curiosity about the hands that built our world, I hope you'll return. Each week I'll be here, opening another volume from my collection, sharing another vanished voice, another lost art. The fire whispers its final words into the darkness, and the library waits, always, for those who seek the stories of how things were made and why they mattered. Rest well, dear listener, until we meet again among the forgotten crafts and patient hands of history.